memory was longer, that the current Vice President of the United States, Mr. Cheney, insisted when issues came up of releasing Mandela from jail, that he should be confined to jail because he's a terrorist. He shouldn't be let out. So I don't want to pay much deference to what official lists of terrorist organizations have to say. Not the least because most of the countries drawing up those lists belong in the top spots on them. Okay.
Thank you very much for your informative talk. I'm curious to know a couple of things. First of all, would you consider Israeli response to Hamas bombardment, rockets, and so on, as belligerent reprisal? Why would that not fall within that purview? Number one. Number two, I'm curious about the interesting disparity that you insist on in deaths on both sides of the conflict. You emphasize the fact that the Palestinians have suffered far more deaths than the Israelis. I'm interested to know what particular moral conclusions you draw from that, and may I remind you that German civilian deaths outnumbered British civilian deaths by many hundreds of powers of 100. And thirdly, I'd be interested to know a little bit about your capacity to dismiss the much vaunted Islamophobia. You have done a very good job dismissing anti-Semitism as a bugaboo, something that is created when Israel is in trouble, and it's sort of a little flag to wave in front of the bull to distract it. Would Islamophobia be the same kind of thing? Is it a legitimate concern? I'd be very interested to hear.
Okay. There are 3 questions asked. Let me look at, you're going to excuse me, the first one I forgot. It'll come back to me in a moment. The second question was the question of what conclusions do I draw from the disparity in numbers, given the fact of the number of German civilians killed. Well, on strictly moral grounds, I think terror bombing is wrong. And it is a fact that the British did initiate the terror bombing during World War II. And yes, it did initiate the terror bombing during World War II.
What was the Blitz?
Sir, I'll be happy to give you the references. The record shows that, in fact, the first country to attack civilian sites and cities to achieve the break in morale was the British. That's not to say the Germans didn't do it also. Of course they did. But as a matter of principle, I think it's correct to say that the terror bombing, the using of the targeting of civilians or in order to break the morale of your enemy, it's illegal and it's immoral under international law. I have no problem with saying that, and I would infer from that fundamental principle that what Great Britain was doing during World War II was a war crime. Had there been a fair Nuremberg process, which was applied across the board to all the parties to the conflict, then of course the British would have had to pay their penalties, just as the United States would have had to pay a penalty for dropping the atomic bomb, if not in Hiroshima, where there is a debate. Surely they would have had to pay a penalty for dropping the atomic bomb in Nagasaki, for which there's no debate. So, if you ask me what principles I infer, bear in mind, I dealt with 2 issues. I looked at the raw numbers, and you're correct, looking at the raw numbers, you can't draw any fundamental conclusions, because then you have to look at combatants versus civilians. So then I looked at the second round, I looked at the second level, I compared combatants versus civilians. And I said there the ratio was about 3 to 4 to 1. And then I looked at the third level of analysis was, once you see civilians, well then there's of course the possibility of what's called the double effect. You were targeting a military site and you inadvertently killed civilians. So that's also a possible argument. So I looked at the third level analysis. First level, total numbers. Second level, number of civilians. And then the third level, what the human rights reports tell us about how those civilians were killed. And I said the human rights reports tell us that the Palestinian civilians were killed due to 1, deliberate targeting, 2, indiscriminate force, 3, excessive force. And I went through what the meaning of those categories was under international law. And from there, I think everyone in this audience can draw a reasonable conclusion about how we should morally classify those killings on both sides. Now I've already forgot the first and the third. The third question
was about debunking anti